Awesome. So, my name is Matt Wheeler. I'm a therapist and I practice in Mesa, Arizona, which is the Phoenix, Arizona area. I do a lot of emotionally focused couples therapy. I love doing attachment work and helping people understand how to get closer and more connected. I love working in the addiction realm because addiction is a major barrier to attachment. And so I personally have focused my practice more on compulsive sexual behaviors. But I enjoy working and talking about addiction in general. Um, let's see. Trying to think of what else I need to say about myself. So usually Scott has this like thing he reads that so I don't have to introduce myself, but the one thing that I usually show off is my socks, and you guys have already seen these before, but I like looked in my drawer and I felt like I think you've seen these before. I felt like I had to wear them because of what day it is, and so I went totally patriotic with stars and stripes. Um, and it actually, I think I was either reading a news article or something, and it brought me back to, I think I was brand new in college back when 9/11 happened 19 years ago. And it just made me remember, like, at that time, like, there were flags everywhere, and we were all, it felt like unified as a nation, even if it was common enemy intimacy. We were able to put a lot of things aside. And so I was like, I'm going to wear my patriotic socks today. So see if as a country we can at least unite on some of that. So all right. And then what I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I've had like several topics running through my mind that we could, I mean, obviously ask in the Q&A any questions you might have. But some of the things that have been popping into my mind a lot lately is that of disclosure. And I know we touch on this occasionally in the webinar, but I wanted to talk because one thing that I try and push soon after discovery is disclosure. And there's this weird balancing game that has to occur, because if you do you can't do a disclosure before a person is ready to actually disclose. But the longer you wait to do disclosure, the more painful it is for the partner. And when you're working with somebody who struggles with an addiction, they have learned to lie to survive. And so it's 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 this very difficult maneuver of trying to get them to a place with so their therapist is working with them to get them into honesty and into integrity. um, and so that when they come with the disclosure, they're being fully honest. There are times where I've found, and I used to be kind of against a polygraph, and now I have found that polygraphs can be a very effective tool in helping to encourage the person to be honest. I don't know that they're the end all be all as far as being perfect, as far as solving all the problems, but it can help to encourage somebody to be honest. There are times where I've encouraged a polygraph just to get the person, even if they've already done a disclosure, where it's say, if somebody tells me, hey, I'm really scared to do a polygraph, sometimes I'll ask, are you hiding anything? Why are you scared to do a polygraph? And that will allow them to start talking about some of those fears. And occasionally it's, yes, you know what, I did have a slip and I haven't disclosed, and I've waited past the 12-hour window of that I know I should disclose, and the longer I wait, the worse it gets, and so I just keep putting it off. And as you guys have heard me talk about before, honesty is the most important piece to a relationship. It's not perfection. It's not sobriety. And people sometimes struggle to hear me say that. We have to be okay that we're going to make mistakes. Let's minimize them. Let's make them as small as possible if we can. But we need to be open about those mistakes, even if it devastates our partner. And this goes both ways. I mean, there are times, I think, in doing therapy where a betrayed spouse needs to disclose information as part of their recovery work. And I think it's important that that be done properly, and that honesty occurs obviously on both sides. We need a very healthy peer relationship where both people in the relationship are sharing and being honest in a healthy way with each other. So
before you go on, can you elaborate on the polygraph? Because you're right, there's not any, there's no protocol for it. And I've heard so many people use it in lots of different ways, before the disclosure. Is this on? I mean, so can you share what your experience is of how you're using it, what you have them ask, etc., and how you found a polygraph person that you trusted? That would be helpful too.
Yes. So we found there's two different polygraphers that we use, and I would encourage you. Typically, your therapist is going to have usually a good idea of somebody to use, but if not, I would actually call a polygrapher and ask, do you have any history in doing polygraphs with people who struggle with addiction? I would specifically ask that, and try and find somebody who has a history so they can help you know what questions to ask. A good polygrapher will also tell you that when they do the interview of somebody and ultimately ask your limited number of questions, they're going to tell you there's only so many questions you can ask and have this be effective. And so they're going to help you narrow it down to it's most effective if it's one question. It gets a little less effective if it's two, and they'll tell you the percentages. They're pretty open about it. And then typically, so hopefully that answered that question on how to find a good one. But typically, what I've found is that I have them do the polygraph shortly after the disclosure session with therapists, right? So plan with your therapist a disclosure session where the betrayed partner is working with their therapist, the partner struggling with addiction is with theirs, and then you have that dual session, if you will, and do the disclosure. And then within the next couple of days, you've got your polygraph lined up and ready to go. So they're really close together. They coincide. Exactly what question to ask. It's best to ask your polygrapher, but you're going to tell them, here's the questions I'm curious about, and they're going to help you narrow it down because that's what they're good at. But a question, I'm just trying to even think off the top of my head. It might be, is there anything you didn't disclose in the disclosure, right? And that might be the only question. And then you have this polygraph that says, hey, they were honest and they disclosed, and they if you will, pass the polygraph, and as far as the disclosure goes, it was to the best of their knowledge, full of all the information. And then the other thing I push is actually a regular or routine polygraph. Now, I don't believe that every person struggling with addiction needs a polygraph. That's something I want to be very careful with. But if if in recovery, you're continuing to catch them, and they're not disclosing regularly, and by regularly, like they're not disclosing slip-ups as they occur, and you keep catching them, that's a case where I say, hey, we probably need to look at a polygraph because you're not getting the honesty and integrity piece in a place where it's working for you. There are times where that's also a time where I might recommend to a client, hey, we probably need to look at a little bit more intensive treatment, maybe even an inpatient option, because you're not getting the honesty piece down. You're not getting the integrity piece down. So I might push inpatient at that time as well. I had a train of thought, and suddenly I'm trying to figure out
I have two questions for you, because I had somebody that asked about doing the. So they were just looking to do a polygraph themselves. There was no therapist involved.
Okay.
I was terrified. What are your thoughts? Like, like, yeah, it was just like, I want him to tell me, and I'm getting a polygraph.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that actually. And the reason I don't recommend that is there's a couple of reasons. Sometimes the questions, like as the interview portion of the polygraph is talked about, there's information that can be shared that actually may not be helpful in a couple's relationship. And so typically, if let's say I'm working with a betrayed partner and their partner has a polygraph, the therapist working with the individual struggling with addiction will receive the polygraph report from the polygrapher. So the client or the spouse, they don't even get a copy of the polygraph. And I actually find that that's beneficial. So that is sent to the therapist, and then I will call the therapist who received the polygraph, and I'll say, hey, let's have a conversation. Or they'll call me, say, hey, I got the polygraph. So then we'll talk. Talk to me about what the polygraph said, what information is there. And then I can bring the information from the polygraph to my client and make sure that it's delivered in a way that is actually helpful. And that's what I've found, because I've found that releasing the polygraph can cause trauma. And so I would never encourage somebody to do a polygraph without therapeutic support or therapeutic intervention in that way.
Thank you. Then my other question was, you advocate for doing a disclosure fairly soon after discovery. And my kind of thought on that has always been when the behavior has stopped. Because if he's, and I'm using he and she, but it could be, but if the behavior is continuing and you're just going to get, I've talked to people who, this is my 9th disclosure, because like there really isn't a break in the behavior. So how do you gauge between discovery and there's a fair chance that the behavior has stopped, so it won't just be, and next.
Yeah, so when you talk about the behavior stopped, I guess and when I say fairly soon after discovery, what I mean by that is as soon as is effective. Okay. And so I'm vaguely answering your question and saying that you're correct, but it depends on the individual. If it takes me 6 months to get an honest disclosure out of the client, then that's as soon as we can get it done. There's other times where I can get it done in 3 months. I have a hard time if I have somebody brand new. I'm trying to think if I've ever done one faster than 3 months.
Okay, that makes sense. And thank you for clarifying, because it really was like, oh, it sounds like you were doing them in fairly close order, but 3 months feels like to a partner forever.
Oh, it totally does. And so you also have to, when I talk about fairly soon, I think Patrick Carnes' early research was that sexual addiction takes 3 to 5 years to rewire the brain. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be in intense therapy for all 3 to 5 years, but he talks about a minimum of 175 hours of group work in addition to individual therapy. Well, the way we do group, which is an hour and a half a week, that's 2.25 years. So when I talk about fairly soon, I'm usually picturing, if I've got somebody with a full-blown addiction coming in my office, they're going to be seeing me for 2 to 3 years. So 3 months is fairly soon after discovery. So hopefully that breaks that down.
That does help. But now I want to, for those of you joining, take a deep breath. We're not saying that everything is going to be chaos for 3 to 5 years. We're saying it's a process. I'm in recovery for decades, and this is still something I work on. I understand that addiction is a chronic thing, but I use this analogy a lot, like diabetes. If I eat correctly, if I take care of myself, manage my weight, I'm not going to have the negative consequences of the diabetes.
Totally.
Like that, if I manage my behaviors, if I do the right things, and if I am taking care of myself, I can learn. So while that might have freaked you out, I just want to be, I want to be. On the other hand, you will see progress. You will see things, shifting, and it won't be overnight. And there's no cure or fix where now magically everything is, lollipops and rainbows. So,
well, and that takes me back to answer your other question that kind of tagged along this. When somebody says the behaviors have stopped, let's say, and again, I'm going to talk sexual addiction because that's my wheelhouse, but um, let's say they have been acting out at massage parlors or with prostitutes or something like that, and we've gotten the behavior. They've worked hard in recovery, and since discovery, they're now acting out with pornography, and it's not with other people. I don't think. I mean, if they're being honest about that, then it's not necessarily that we have to wait until all the pornography use has gone before we can do a proper disclosure. But I would say that we do need to, we do need to have them on the road where these things are diminishing. And so I hope that clarifies, because if we wait until everything has stopped, then a disclosure may not happen, not soon enough for the betrayed partner. But at the same time, if we establish this routine of them disclosing regularly their occasional slip or whatever that looks like, and we do a full disclosure, and then they continue any slip ups they have, they're disclosing, we wouldn't wait to do the disclosure. The disclosure can still be very effective. But of course, our where we're trying to take the individual is to a healthy sobriety and a good recovery. And it's so hard for me to say how long that should take, but
yeah, no, but that's exactly right, because there's no, well, at X amount of time, everybody, there is no one size fits all formula. What you shared initially was when the client is ready to be truthful, has done the preparation, and has shown at least a good amount of stopping the most problematic behaviors with, some minor slips or whatever. But, I talked to lots of people. I've talked to people where, he acted out, with an escort the night before the disclosure was supposed to happen. And I'm thinking, that's not really ready to do a disclosure.
Nope. In fact, I would stop the disclosure at that point and say, and with an empathetic response, apologize and say, honestly, we're not quite ready there. Yeah. If there's an acting out behavior the night before, we're not ready.
Right. Yeah. So, and it sets a foundation for healing and moving forward. And so the addict needs to have things lined up in a proper way to provide the information in a data format to the partner, and the partner absolutely deserves, to have that foundation. But I hate when I hear, that partners have gotten dumped on, or the addict finally relents and says everything and bears their soul so they feel better, and now the poor partner is traumatized and there's no support, and now during COVID this is happening all the time, and they're trapped in the house with the same person. It's awful. So anyway,
I love it, Tammy. You're doing great.
Okay, so are we ready to move into some questions, because they're stacking up?
Let's jump in.
Okay, so the first one, I just found out about my husband's addiction, and although he had all the signs of an addict, his response is not what I would have expected. He is very open and proactive to help, takes full responsibility, is not denying, blaming, gaslighting, etc. From everyone's experience, is this a form of manipulating me into thinking what I found is all of it, and into thinking he's not doing it anymore, just help, and into not leaving him? So is him sharing and being open just manipulative?
Yeah. The hardest thing about it is I actually really love that question. I think that's, to be honest with you, pretty awesome. Have I had instances where somebody is very open and then we find out later that there were things that they were still keeping? Sure, that can happen. I don't know that, even if it is happening, I don't know that I would encourage you to ruminate on that, because the reality of it is, it's not your responsibility to try and figure out. It's not your responsibility to be the lie detector, right? You need to take the information he's giving you and work with it, and it will be to his detriment if he isn't being honest. And so it's really tough, because I encourage all my partners, like, you can only take what the individual is giving you, and I would work with that, and trust. And by trust, that doesn't mean you need to make yourself vulnerable in an unhealthy way. It doesn't mean you need to not have boundaries, right? But you need to, you're not going to be able to force the information out. If you go kind of with what we were talking about, encourage a full disclosure anyway. You might discover, here's the other thing that's really tough. Sometimes I'll have a client do a full disclosure, and then later they're like, hey, you know what, I remembered something else, right? The best way to explain it is that when our brains are in an unhealthy place, we don't store long-term memories when we're acting from our limbic system. Our limbic system is not our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is where we store memory, just to make it simple. And so there's things that we can remember later on, and that doesn't mean that they're lying post-disclosure. So we talk about how they can come forward with that. So just because you find out some new information doesn't mean that, in this case, he was lying. But I would encourage you, go through the disclosure process anyway. If you feel like it would be helpful, ask for a polygraph. Again, it's not the end all be all, but I think it helps it out a lot, and can allow more to come forward as necessary. So I don't know, Tammy, do you feel like I answered that?
No, that's exactly where I went. I thought, addicts are so compartmentalized that, I think that's part of why it takes, that's what I share with people. That's why it takes the 3 to 6 months. It's not that they, well, we lie to ourselves, and we compartmentalize, and we don't go, oh, that really was problematic. It's like you said, it's not even on my radar. That happened so long ago. That was 2 days ago, So it's one of those things where it takes time for the addict to be able to pull the information together, to get a timeline. We've had people in our treatment center who, like completely had no thought that, about certain aspects, would have not been able to get in touch with that really until it was, until the situation was such. So I agree, go with, he's being truthful. The other thing is, at some point, if we're fortunate, we addicts become willing. That's what, and some of them arrive on our doorstep at seeking integrity, and they're not really willing. They just don't want, they're tired of, the spouse or partner going, or, there's been an ultimatum, like, you need to get help or else.
Right.
But we'll take that. But, for those that are going like, I really do need help, I can't keep living like this, I don't want to live like this, great.
Right.
That is, now, hopefully he is absolutely engaging in positive recovery things, because that window also can close where they go, oh, I've gotten better. I've done enough so that the pressure's off. I'm not uncomfortable. So we initially call it the pink cloud period. And so then everything's great and recovery's great and all of this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden we haven't done enough work. We don't have enough support. And then the next thing you know, relapse. And what happened? So making sure that, continuing on that, getting the support to be able to, like I said, with diabetes, it's a daily thing. Just, as long as we every day are looking at how we can enhance our recovery, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question, partner of an SAPA and almost 3 years in. He's in weekly therapy, 12-step, but no engaging or step working. Okay, listens to men's groups, listens. Okay. Listens to men's groups on Sunday, but I wonder if I should be concerned that he has never felt the need or desire, his words, to read anything on sex porn addiction, i.e. Out of the Shadows or the like. I've spent the first 2.5 years reading, listening, watching everything I could to learn about him. You are such a typical partner. I applaud. I mean, you want to know. I'm really grateful. This addiction and how to be the best support for him. However, he's only read Out of the Doghouse because I asked him, am I wasting my time?
Well, so let me throw out the last statistic I heard is that 91% of all self-help books are purchased by women. why I say that is I'm not sure. Call it, I mean, I hate to throw it out this way, call it a gender thing. Men don't typically, stereotypically, stop and ask for directions. They want to figure it out. It's maybe a threat to their manliness or their manhood. I don't know, right? Because I'm one of the 9% who buys and reads self-help books, right?
But that's why you're
Um,
a therapist and you do this work. You want to be involved in it.
oh yeah. And so the tough part is that here it is common for a partner to dive into podcasts and books and 12-step and doing this 12-step work. But when you have somebody who is either, I mean, let's say they're not a secure attachment, that they're an anxious attachment, or they're anxious avoidant, or fearful avoidant, or dismissive, right? You don't typically, you, you're going to get somebody who probably in that way is not diving in, trying to discover how to fix it. They start getting on a path where things are getting a little bit better, or they finally disclose, even if they're discovered. And so they start to feel better. And so for them, it's like, if I'm going to 12-step at all, if I'm doing weekly therapy, man, I'm doing more than I ever would have imagined, right? And there's a decent chance in his mind, he's overloaded already. And so I'm not suggesting that that's healthy. I'm just suggesting that that's the pattern I see. Does that make sense?
Yes.
He's overloaded because this is like, you're playing in the sprinklers and he feels like he's getting hit by a whole dam full of water. Why is that the case? It's an emotional tolerance issue. And so going to 12-step, going to therapy, it's like, oh, you want me to I need to do the steps on top of that? Well, from a therapeutic standpoint, I'm pushing them. Yeah, you need to do the steps, right? You need to really work in and discover. They feel like they're running a marathon and you're looking back at them thinking, you just got out the front door. So are you wasting your time? I can't answer that. I guess it's hard for me to know based on what I see. I would say no. You're doing the best you know how to help, and sometimes it feels like you're dragging him through recovery. Um, I would encourage you to keep being loving, keep being kind. I would encourage you to say, "Hey, I read this book. I think it would be helpful. I hope you read it." But at the same time, I don't think it helps to give ultimatums. I don't think it helps to threaten, if that makes sense. But at the same time, I don't blame you. You're looking for any sign that is telling you this is worthwhile. And so what I see you doing is great. You want to be connected to him. You want to have a beautiful relationship. So you're looking for anything, and you're probably looking at his behavior saying, well, if I really wanted it, this was what I would do. And so he should do the same thing to show me he really wants it. And that may not be what's happening in his head. So it's a tough one. So I think I've answered the question, but I'm not entirely sure if that actually helped.
Well, I think you answered the question. And my 2 cents is, in the chat, I put the Sex Addiction 101 work group, and that is a facilitated time for the men to go through the Sex Addiction 101 workbook. I've talked to many men who have the workbook and it's sitting on the table or nightstand or whatever, and they haven't read it. So I go with, I 100% agree. Most guys don't read. However, I have some other options. There's a podcast on Sex Addiction 101. There's a podcast on Out of the Doghouse. There's a podcast on everything. And these webinars are recorded, and you will find them on sexandrelationshiphealing.com under resources, and then you'll see previously recorded. And there are tons of webinars on specific topics. For example, John Taylor does rock and relationships, and he provides, some very clear, here's some very practical tools that you can use, do these 4 things, negotiating, he's done some really good ones that are,
Yeah.
that can be very helpful. But Kristen Snowden,
Audio books is another
yeah,
one.
yeah. The audio, any of these, and the podcasts and webinars are all free, and you can listen to them. But I was also thinking for you, Kristen Snowden uses the story I'm telling myself. So perhaps, to say the story I tell myself when I don't see you more actively engaged in this is that you don't care about a relationship, or you don't want to get better or whatever. I'd like to hear from you, your perspective, because that would give him the opportunity to share what Matt says, where he's going like, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything I can, and you would kind of see that. And then how do you navigate between what you're seeing and what he thinks he's doing, like what's the next step for each of you to step into? So that was my thought on it.
I like it.
Next question. How do I mention rehab to my sex addict partner? Also, why does he always mention divorce, but he never takes action toward it? How do I stop this divorce talk for good? Background, he found out he was an addict in February and has gone to SAA and a CSAT for 6 months and just stopped.
Ooh. Okay, so I think mentioning rehab, one of the barriers to rehab, like to going to an inpatient treatment, is that sometimes people feel like that needs to be my last resort. And I've actually had people tell me I'm scared to go because if this doesn't work, then nothing's going to work. And I encourage them to look at it a little differently. One, it's almost like saying, if I go get, I'm struggling here. Here's my poor example, but if I go get surgery and it doesn't work, then I might as well give up hope. And it's like, well, what if you go do surgery again? Right? Like, what if it takes multiple surgeries, right? Like, there's plenty of people who have multiple surgeries and that's what it takes and things get better, right? So it's realizing that if you go to inpatient and it allows you to I'm going to make up an arbitrary number, to gain 50% of your recovery, and then you're working recovery and find out that honestly you probably need to go again, then go again. And sometimes it's okay, you did inpatient here, and 6 months or a year later you might do inpatient at this place that maybe specializes differently or whatever, or go back to the same one. Maybe you need to go a little longer. But ultimately, it's kind of getting that concept out of somebody's head that this isn't a last resort. In fact, why wouldn't we go get the best care possible right away? Why don't we start this off as good as we can right away? Because if I do individual therapy with somebody for a year, and let's say that's once a week for a year, that's 52 hours in a year, right? I'm just throwing numbers out here. And if you go to inpatient and you spend, let's say you only do a week, but I mean, you're like, most inpatients, we're talking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, longer. But I mean, you're getting 52 hours in a few days. So going into inpatient or to rehab, if you will, as you stated, is getting a whole lot more work done in a much shorter amount of time, can often break down a lot of the barriers that we're holding back, and really get us a lot deeper and dig in deeper so that when we come out, we have a much better foundation. We're ready to dive in, and it often gets us away from our acting out behaviors. So it can often help us get the sobriety that we're looking for. So I don't know if that helps. I guess the next question is, why is he always mentioning divorce? It's hard for me to know. I don't know him, but I see a lot of people mention divorce as a way of saying, stop whatever you're doing that's making me uncomfortable right now, and I'm gonna force you to stop by threatening divorce, and then I can calm down, and I'm not gonna go after divorce because I don't want a divorce. But if you keep threatening me and making me uncomfortable the way you do, then I'm going to ultimately divorce you. And they're really not wanting a divorce. They're really not even planning to get a divorce or even trying to go that way, it's the word they use to shut it down. Now, one thing I say to people, and this is pretty strong, threatening a relationship with divorce, threatening a marriage with divorce is the highest form of emotional manipulation, right? Because you're essentially saying, I'm going to kill the relationship. And so I tell my couples that is a no-go. I don't care how much you're hurting. I don't care what's happening. You cannot use the D word. It's the worst word we can use. The only time you can use the D word is when you say, here's the divorce papers. I'm in a peaceful place and I'm ready to move on in my life. Then you can use the divorce word and go through with it. So how do you get it to stop for good? Have a conversation, share this video with him, have him get on here and ask me questions. So
I, I think that's really helpful. And to me, yeah, I talk to people all the time. And, you know, I say, I think if you come from a place of caring, when you talk about rehab, just like Matt was saying, I want you to be healthy. I want you to heal. I see this as destructive, not only for you, but for us. You know, I don't want to continue to watch you self-destruct and to hurt our relationship. You know, those kind of messages rather than you've got to get, you know, I mean, like you know, I think if you're coming to it from a place of I really care about you and this isn't, you know, this isn't working. I see you hurting, you know, that kind of in a loving way, you know, can be a way to share, you know, that I want you to get the help you need. I really do agree. You know, I was so fortunate that my parents packed me up and sent me off to treatment, and I was terrified. I've shared this. I was terrified that it wouldn't work for me. I was equally terrified that it would, because I could not imagine my life without my acting out behaviors. I could not. And so it was terrifying. But I'm so grateful that they did that. And you know, I went to treatment once. I've been in recovery for decades.
yeah,
It hasn't been perfect. I mean, I have not relapsed, but you know, my life hasn't been perfect. And
right.
you know, and I've struggled with life, but you know, I've had the tools and the support to use to be able to navigate that. What I also think with this is, and you know, I was talking on another webinar this week, and we were talking about how sad it is to me when people choose not to get the help that they need, because, you know, if this is an attachment disorder, which I believe it is, that means we're always distanced from people that we love out of fear, out of inability, but we're always holding ourselves away and not getting the opportunity to do what I think life is really about, is connect with people in a real and meaningful way. So we hurt ourselves while we're trying to protect ourselves. Next question. What kind of question could be asked in follow-up polygraphs if ongoing lying is a problem?
So that one's kind of a tough one, because I don't know that a polygraph is going to, the polygraph is about becoming honest, right? And I've had certain clients that, to be honest, I've had clients that aren't even married, right? It's not even about the relationship, where I've told them, I will not work with you unless you do a polygraph on a regular basis and have your polygrapher send it to me, because they need it in order to keep them honest. And so if ongoing lying is a problem, I don't know that the polygraph itself is going to solve that, other than it's just going to bring honesty up more, or bring it to the table. And so I would spend time trying to help that client figure out what is happening that lying continues to be an issue. And trying to explore with that individual, where did they learn to lie? Where did lying become a survival technique, a survival mechanism? And what is happening currently that is reminding the client of that situation? So I don't know that I have the perfect answer as far as follow-up question on the polygraph, but hopefully that gives some clarity on that as a tool.
I have nothing on polygraphs, so I'm gonna have to.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question, is it reasonable to think that my husband is still sober 3 years since discovery day, cold turkey if he's been acting out for the previous 17 plus years? He's had 2 slips that I found out about months after the fact because he didn't disclose. I had to ask, and it is quick to say, I'm feeling really good. When I get triggered, I just think of something else.
Um, I mean, it's tough, right? I kind of go back to that first question. Is it reasonable to think my husband is still sober? If you don't have any other evidence, I think that you have to go with that. But I guess the part that's tripping me up is that he had 2 slips that you found out about months after the fact because he didn't disclose. That to me, if he slipped twice and didn't disclose, he wasn't sober. So I guess I'm a little bit confused. If he's saying he's feeling really good, when he gets triggered, I just think of something else. I mean, okay, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do get a little bit nervous if he hasn't been disclosing slips. So somebody can tell me they're sober, and then I find out later that they've actually had a couple of slips. I'm really concerned because you've lied to me, you've lied to your spouse. Like, what's happening here? You know, healthy recovery is that if you have a slip, you disclose it within 12 hours. So I'm trying to figure out if I'm reading this question right, but I would say that I would have trepidation that there is 17 years of sobriety, especially if you've told me you've got 2 slips that you found out months after the fact. Because then if the only way you're finding out about slips is that the person struggling with addiction is disclosing them, is being caught, that makes me really nervous. They need to be bringing forward, hey, I was really slippery today. And to be honest with you, I almost had a slip. And here's some of the tools I used. Or, hey, honestly, I'm really struggling today and I'm lonely. Can we talk? Like they ultimately at some point need to bring forward that vulnerability. And if everything's hunky dory all the time, yeah, I get nervous. So hopefully that answers your question without striking too much fear.
And I'm like, wow, that person's a miracle. So like, and she's saying that sarcastically because I'm like, I do not know any addict who has stopped cold turkey after 17 years unless they're doing some other behavior. So I'd be looking at, are they using chemicals, alcohol, cannabis, opiates, stimulants? Are they eating a lot? Are they using food to numb out? Are they gaming? Are they shopping? I'd be looking at all the stuff that's going on because and now this is partly me, but for me, when I stopped certain things, then I was looking to do other things. So I struggled with food, and so I had to work on my food addiction. So I'd be looking at all of those things holistically. And if the secrets and lies are still happening, he didn't tell, that would be problematic for me. So I take back the snarky. I didn't mean to be snarky. I was just bottled up there. But, I would be really concerned and looking at the overall. Now, if he's stopped the acting out behavior for the most part, and, he's not exhibiting other problematic behaviors, fantastic. I mean, really, that would be fantastic. So, but I would,
Yeah,
I would be
we often call it addiction hopping, right? I've seen people go
yes.
cold turkey, but now like you said, they eat a lot and they're not healthy on that end, or they're drinking more, or like you said, gaming, right? We call it addiction hopping. So I would be, seeing, is this person learning to get in touch with their emotions and their pain? Is this person learning to share their emotions and their pain and learning to connect with other human beings? And if they're not learning to do that, I'm nervous because the addiction is all about staying disconnected. And so over time, you should be seeing this person progressing. Sometimes the partner is the last person they'll attach to. And so if you don't feel like they're attaching to you the way you want it, if you can tell they're attaching to others, that is really good progress. And we're obviously pushing for attachment to the partner as soon as we can, as soon as they are able. But yeah, those are definitely things I'd be looking for. So hopefully that answers it.
And trust your gut. If you're going like, my gut is saying this isn't quite right, you honestly go with that. But um, uh, I talk often about the acting out behavior is the symptom. And, at our treatment program, we're looking to address those underlying issues, which are typically neglect, trauma, abuse, abandonment, loss. I mean, there's something, some pain that, as in addiction, we're looking to disconnect from. So that is basically what Matt was talking about. If he's attaching in a healthy way to you or other people, that's real progress. So, okay, next question. If the partner is well prepared, how do you determine if the addict is ready for full disclosure? For example, ability to show empathy and or a certain amount of progress in a 12-step program?
I don't know that I have the ability to say like, hey, if they're past step 5, that sort of thing, or past step 4. I think step 4 is oh shoot.
Searching and fearless moral inventory of themselves.
Right, the inventory. That's where my brain was stopping. Right, so like it's tough because yes, I mean, the ability to show some empathy I think is fantastic. There's times though where I've had somebody that what I've looked for is, do I feel like I'm consistently getting truthful responses? Do I feel like I'm getting disclosures on the smaller level? I'm really trying to figure out, is this person ready to come clean? Sometimes they don't have a lot of empathy yet. But the betrayed partner deserves the disclosure. And so if I can just get them to come clean and be honest, I'll take the honesty and give the partner the honesty, even if we're not there yet with empathy. I don't know that to be honest, the disclosure is not an empathy session. It's not a, let me tell you how bad I feel, or let me acknowledge that I can tell how much I've impacted you. That's going to take a long time. You're not going to get that in the disclosure. The disclosure is, let me be real with you about the history of my life and the history of what's gone on during our relationship. So empathy is great. 12-step can be great into helping them learn accountability and do a good inventory. But really what I'm looking for as a clinician is, does it appear to me that they're coming forward with information, that they're clear and honest about what's happening, that they're willing to explore what's gone on and stay out of denial? So hopefully that answers the question well enough.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I agree, because empathy is not, I mean, if addiction is all about self-centered, the ability to continue to use, or act out, but I'm going to do this. I cannot have empathy for anyone else, because that would I would feel guilt and shame, and that would be horrible. So that empathy is not something that comes naturally to an addict. We have to learn. Okay, next question. Would an SA be considered a mother enmeshed man if there were very poor boundaries? Mom was intrusive and pushy, but he was for the most part, dealt with by both parents in a neglectful way. He very obviously projects his feeling trapped and overwhelmed by her onto me. He always felt the need to be the good boy in the family, and he was very superficial, almost fake pleasant relationship with both parents. While he doesn't have the classic overly involved relationship that is typical of mother enmeshed men, the terrible boundaries makes me wonder if this is still an apt category.
Great question. I would say, obviously, poor boundaries, mom being intrusive and pushy, right? I think sometimes we try a little too hard to put people into a box. And what I would encourage you to do, I mean, I know Ken Adams has some great work on mother enmeshed men. I would read it and take the gems out of it that you can. As you learn more about his childhood. I mean, it is. You talk about neglect, and neglect can influence us. That when we do get some type of attention or response, that it looks very much like enmeshment. I mean, because we're so starving for it. So I think maybe don't spend as much time like trying to figure out do they belong, does he belong in this mother enmeshed men box? If some of those pieces fit, then use it, and if they don't, then don't, and move on, and look at other things. I mean, you might spend a little bit more time in understanding the attachment issues in general, but anyway, that would be my quick thought there, unless I'm missing something, Tammy.
No, I put in the chat, I put the book Neglect, the Silent Abuser, because when you said both of them were neglectful, when there isn't bandwidth with the parents, then kids do feel like I have to be a very good boy or girl, in order
Right.
to, and I can't make mistakes, and I can't take up space. So I would invite you to read that book. And I put Dr. Ken Adams' website up there. But both of them also did a podcast on sex, love, and addiction with Dr. Rob. So you may find that useful as well. But, even just him starting to create healthy boundaries with his parents, if he's feeling all of that, and you maybe constantly, not constantly, but reminding him that, I'm not mom, I want to show up for you in a different way. So, but it is really challenging because I'm old, those old tapes. I don't know, the DVR, I don't know, continue to play,
Yeah,
those, that's just those pathways. So
they're on repeat.
yes. Okay, next question. If masturbation was part of the addiction, but couple no longer having intimacy since recent discovery, should masturbation be allowed as long as no longer with pornography, or is that considered continuing behavior? Great question.
Oh my goodness, it's actually a really good question. So this one, this one's a bit of a tough one because um, a lot of times when I have somebody who obviously has masturbation as part of the addiction, typically masturbation involves fantasy. Masturbation involves, obviously there's porn or whatever else going on. And from there are some people, it's like somebody who's addicted to alcohol. It's like, sorry, I don't know that you can ever do this in a healthy way. And you may need to abstain from it for the rest of your life. And it's, unfortunately, it has no place in your life. If it were to be used, right? So this is me kind of sidestepping the question a little bit because I don't know the circumstances, but again, for a lot of addicts, it's off the table. I will say no, masturbation isn't going to work. It's too easy for it to spiral you back down. If it were to be used, the only way that would be healthy is what's referred to as mindful masturbation. It's not done with fantasy. It's not done with porn. It doesn't, and that it's really just almost like a physical experience with the body. It's not for escape. It's not for resolving pain. It is just purely a physical experience with the body, and that's it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, no, that was very helpful. And Dr. Rob talks about, yes, if there's no fantasy, and if you're doing it like you're dating yourself, and you're getting to know yourself in a different way, that might work. But if it's just like, well, we're not intimate now and I need to get off, that probably isn't going to serve your recovery well. So
You've also got to figure out like where your moral place is as well, because if you do it and there's a lot of shame that comes up, you've got to figure out how to resolve the shame. I've had people who it's like it's off their possibilities just because it conflicts too much with their moral belief system. And so that's another thing, because you don't want to force it. So anyway, hopefully that gives enough information there.
and talk to your very qualified therapist about your specific situation and your sponsor as well. So, anything that you do in your head, probably a bad choice. If you're getting input, this is good, but we don't know your particular situation.
Yeah.
So get input from those that know you. What's on your inner circle? What's in your middle circle? What's in your outer circle? And if you don't know what that means, talk to your sponsor, talk to your therapist. And they talk about it in the work groups. We have a female Sex Addiction 101 work group starting on the 25th of September, but the next men's group starts October 1st. Great groups, 6 weeks, 90 minutes, really helpful. Okay, next question. How do I address the fact that my husband refuses to stop seeing his therapist who is not a CSAT? So for those of you joining, CSAT is Certified Sex Addiction Therapist. It's people who have had specific training to work with this particular issue. Because he's comfortable with him, even though there have been several red flags over the past year that he is not partner sensitive, nor does he hold my husband accountable. The therapist mocks my boundaries, told me that he does not follow a certain model, partner model or otherwise, for disclosures, and tells my husband that he shouldn't adhere to all of my boundaries for safety because it looks as if groveling to me and he would lose himself. Help. So the first thing I'm going to say is, if you heard the therapist say these things, that's one thing. If your person that's seeing the therapist is telling you, don't trust what you're hearing particularly. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's such a hard one, because I've had spouses come in and be really angry. I can't believe you told my spouse this, and I'm able to, maybe in a couples session, try and figure out like what happened and what the breakdown was. Sometimes it's the client misinterpreting what's being shared or said. I think it is really important to not make a judgment. Now, if you did hear it, I mean, here's the hard part. It's tough because there's been times where I've had an alliance with a client, and I've had a really good alliance, and maybe they've never been able to feel comfortable with a therapist before, but I also recognize that their particular needs don't work for my skill set. Then I have to refer them. And so I'm often with clients trying at times, if I don't feel like I'm a good fit, that I have the skill set for them, I'm trying to refer them to a clinician who has the best skill set for them. So I think, how do you address it really is your biggest question. And I think going to your husband, it is husband, yes, going to your husband and expressing your fears, expressing your concerns. I don't think threatening. I think asking questions. Can you help me understand why you feel most comfortable with this therapist? You might even say, hey, are you open for me challenging you a little bit? Is it possible you feel most comfortable with this therapist because they aren't a CSAT, and so you can kind of get by with certain things? And I would ask that, but try to ask it in a curious way, not in an angry and defensive way. I would talk about your concerns about not feeling like your boundaries are respected, or that maybe ultimately this isn't going to be the best use of time and money if you aren't getting what you need with that therapeutic relationship that he has going on.
And I think it's fair to ask, like, what are, I'm curious, what are your goals for therapy? If it's to help if our mutual goal, and listen to Dr. Stan Tatkin's podcast on sex, love, and addiction, if our mutual goal is that we in partnership move forward, and you're choosing to see this therapist that I'm not seeing as helpful to our relationship, I'm curious how we're going to get from where we are now to move forward. What does that look like for you? And I think it's fair to, on page 75 of Prodependence, there are different terms of how to, and I think it's fair to go to the therapist and say, these terms help me and will help rebuild our relationship. Using other terms are detrimental to, us moving forward. And at the end of the day, at some point, people make choices. And if he's always going to choose a therapist that is not helping your relationship, that's data. You have more information on which to evaluate, what's happening. So, thoughts, Matt?
No, I think I think you're right on. It's really trying to address those fears and concerns and talk about the common goals that you have. There are times where working with a therapist that maybe isn't the best fit it helps him open up. and start to do the work. And then he will ultimately go, okay, this was really good, and I'm very grateful for this therapist. Now it's time to move on to somebody else. And that's okay too. So I'm hoping that'll happen for you guys if that's truly what the issue is.
We've got like 4 more questions. Do you have time to stay, or do you need to
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll keep them going. Regarding porn addiction, what if down the line I find inappropriate content? How do I get him to help given the nature of what he would have to disclose? How much am I obligated to do? This, it sounds like a partner. And what are statistics it can pour over from off screen to reality? When I ask him if he has done anything in reality, so it sounds like this is just porn addiction, no physical real-time contact. He constantly and passionately says never, and that the allure is just the private escape and that it's not reality. And there are lots of people that it never goes into reality. So thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, actually, it's really not uncommon that somebody they would never act out in person and only in fantasy. In fact, I've had people that are essentially at the doorstep of acting on the fantasy, and they're no longer into it. They're like, okay, this isn't right. Like, this doesn't do it for me, and they leave, right? So for some people, that's the part of the brain that it's actually activated on. So when you talk about like finding inappropriate content, it's really tough because early in recovery, there's times where we're so focused on those inner circle behaviors of, no porn, no masturbation, no alcohol, whatever the issue might be. And then as treatment goes on, they should be gaining the awareness that, hey, you know what? There's certain content I can't go to. This isn't good for me. And so it doesn't, or for instance, if they're, out for lunch with some buddies and they notice somebody and they are fantasizing over somebody or looking somebody up and down, lusting after them is often how you say it. And if they're doing that, they're starting to gain the awareness that these things aren't good, that I'm giving myself chemical hits to the brain, and I can't justify this behavior. So my hope is as recovery continues, some of those things will decrease and the awareness will be had. As far as how do you address it, I think you can ask questions. Hey, does any of this feel similar to what your pornography used to be like? And you can let them know, it makes me nervous. I'm not comfortable with it. I'm wondering if you're aware how often you're using this, how often you're going to it. Is it possible that you're riding that line and getting as close to the line as possible, but yet you feel it's justified or okay because you aren't going all the way? And tell him that really makes me nervous. I want you to stay as far away from the cliff as possible so that we can connect as much as possible. So there were multiple things here. So I'm hoping that, again, that answers everything.
I think that was great. So how long will it take me to get over my husband's sex addiction? He is trying, but he still gets very angry. Is that his shame or him trying to control me?
That last question I love. Is it shame or him trying to control me? My answer might be yes. Really, sometimes we think, oh, he's trying to control me or she's trying to control me. It's really them trying to manage their emotional comfort. They feel discomfort, they feel shame, they feel embarrassed. That, like earlier I mentioned, they threaten with divorce, not because they want that, it's because they're trying to manage how uncomfortable they are. So how long is it going to take you to get over? Oh my goodness, that's a beautiful question. It's like anything else, I guess. It depends on how severe the trauma is. It depends on your support group. It depends on your level of connection and your therapy process and your active recovery yourself. In recovery for you is just as important as it is for him, even though you didn't deserve what happened. You still need, as you do your work, I think a lot of times it's learning to grieve. It's learning to hurt for all the loss and pain you've had. And that is what allows us to really let go, is really the grieving process. So hopefully that answers it. I know we're trying to go quick.
Yeah, well, and we, we talk about, yes, it's a grieving process. You're going to grieve the loss of what you should have had, could have had. His anger, like there's we've done lots of webinars on, how to, like, it's not okay. So it's okay for him to step away and say, I need 20 minutes or whatever. You getting over it. I mean, he's an addict. This is a lifelong journey. So you will find a place. It will take you probably a year and a half for him to, of him doing the right thing for you to really start trusting. Maybe sooner. You'll see nuggets of it, but, to kind of, chill things out. But as Dr. Rob says, for now, your job is to be upset. So,
Yeah.
But get support. Get
Yeah.
support. Do what you're doing. So I've been with my partner for over 20 years. I know his family background from before me as well. There is no trauma, no underlying issues. Very well adjusted. How can therapy help if he just started out curious and then got addicted?
Okay, great question. I actually love this question because sometimes that is the case, right? There isn't necessarily trauma that was creating pain that we are trying to cover up. And the way you have to look at this is that the exposure to the pornography, I don't know why I'm even saying pornography. It could be
Yeah,
alcohol.
I don't know what the acting out is with this one, but
the exposure to whatever it is, right? The exposure to the substance, the exposure to the experience, whatever it is, can be the trauma itself. And so, and then oftentimes what I'm looking for is, once you felt yourself get into it, what was going on in your life that you didn't reach out for support? So there's times where I think, well, yeah, you came from a great family and you're very well adjusted, but how come when you got into it, you weren't reaching out? Well, sometimes there's trauma that really is, well, my family's, they're all a bunch of really good people. And maybe we have a bit of perfectionism going on in the family. And so the trauma is, I didn't feel like I could say I had a problem. And so then I was totally alone and isolated when this started to become a problem. And so that the trauma is kind of this dual, like, the exposure to whatever the thing was, but also for whatever reason, there's this inability within the family system to be able to reach out and get support. And it could just be all of his own shame, but still, that's pretty rough. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, and most of the guys that come into our treatment program don't, some of them do, but many of them do not think they have had trauma, neglect, anything. I didn't think, then I read Neglect the Silent Abuser and got hit between the eyes. I was like, oh my gosh, would never have owned it. And that was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, neglect is the sneakiest wound of all of them, because it's almost like you don't know what you're missing if you never had it. So, all right, last question.
I read that an addict shouldn't be doing things to numb out, like playing games on their phone, TV, watching, or etc., because it reflects the same idea behind their addiction. My husband is constantly on his phone playing games, which bothers me since his phone was his main mode of acting out. But when I bring it up to his attention, he gets defensive with, I'm not allowed to chill out. Besides, my therapist, not a CSAT, says it's okay.
Okay. So again, bring these questions back up in 2 weeks and let's talk a little bit more as well. But to answer this, it's tough because numbing out isn't healthy, but finding healthy ways to relax, finding healthy ways to, obviously like meditate and learn to feel our feelings. Right? We need to learn to feel and experience what's going on for us, not disconnecting. And as far as playing games on the phone or TV watching, it might be triggering the same part of the brain. Maybe I should bring that up next time and we can talk a little bit more about the different brain areas that can be activated. But it might be triggering it. It might not, depending on what the purpose of the acting out originally was, whether it was for a rush of adrenaline, whether it was for relaxation, or whether it was for escape. However, that doesn't mean that numbing out for any of us is good or healthy. Um, and the question is, I mean, it's interesting. Besides, my therapist says it's okay. I don't even know when I would tell somebody like, hey, go ahead and numb out on your phone. It's okay. You know, I might say to somebody, hey, if you want to sit down and enjoy a game on your phone for 15 minutes, like, why don't we talk about what amount of time is healthy? Let's talk about what that's doing for you. Let's see if there's other ways you can get this met that doesn't involve disconnecting from what's going on around you, right? So I'm going to be
Going for a walk with you, being
yeah,
active with, you know, with you or the family or whatever. Yeah, the disconnect is
that's
do
the
you
scary
miss
part.
hours, you know, is it like hours later he's still doing the same? You know, I was talking to one guy, and he you know, like I start talking about, you know, shopping, you know, like looking at watches, and he goes, oh, I do that. And I thought, yeah, and it's this whole thing of going in and, you know, looking and looking and looking and just being down that whole rabbit hole of things. So everybody needs a, you know, a disconnect and a break, but you know, you know, there are other ways to do that that are connected to people that are what, you know, I mean, I've been, during COVID, I'm doing lots of jigsaw puzzles. You know, I'm still able to have a conversation with my husband while I'm doing a jigsaw
Yeah.
puzzle, but yeah, I can focus on that. And that isn't, you know, it isn't numbing me out and taking me away and disconnecting me from everyone. So
Yeah, if we're disconnecting and literally on our own. Now, if I go for a walk by myself or do a hike or a bike ride, right? So that doesn't mean I'm disconnecting, right? I mean, that might be me getting some good spiritual connection, if that makes
yes,
sense, or
yeah,
the exposure to nature, right? But man, if somebody's sitting on a screen, I do get nervous.
hmm,
So
yes.
hopefully this helps you guys today.
Yeah,
Thank
but great.
you.
I think bring that topic up next time. That would be fantastic. So
Great job on the questions, guys. You guys are
yes, thank you for all of
awesome.
you. And thank you, Matt. It was delightful to see you as
Good to
always.
see you
So,
too,
all
Tammy.
right. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.